All right, good morning, everyone who's with us in person and online. I'd like to call this special July meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee to order. The first item on our agenda is the introductions. Start with those of us here.
Okay, I'm Christina Bosworth, and I've been on the CAC since last September, and I was appointed by Commissioner Mary Ellen Smith. I live in Waimama and have particular interest in areas of southern Hillsborough County.
Good morning, my name is Aya Yaskin, and I am appointed by the city. And my interests are planning, bike pedestrian, accessibility.
I'm Bill Roberts. I'm appointed by the Aviation Authority. And Johnny, I'll let you recognize those who are with us virtually.
Begin with myself. I'm Johnny Wong, TPO staff, and I'm the liaison to the CAC. It looks like next is Artie Fryer.
Thank you.
Artie, yourself muted.
All right, good morning. I hope you can hear me now. I'm Artie Fryer. I represent the Transportation Disadvantage Coordinating Board, on which I've served for several years. I'm a resident, lifelong resident of Tampa, and certainly glad to be a part of this group.
Thanks for joining us.
Next, is Carolyn Brown.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, sorry. Good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn Brown, and I was appointed by Commissioner Myers.
All right, thank you. Next is Christina Costa. Christine, yourself muted.
There we got it. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Christine Acosta. I'm appointed by City Councilman Joseph Citro on the CAC, and I think I've been a CAC committee member for 2.5 years, and I'm very excited about our presentations this morning. Thank you.
Next is Ed Majewski.
Yeah, this is Ed Majewski. I have been appointed by the Expressway Authority. Previously, I had spent 4 years on the committee appointed by Hart.
Next is Rick Fernandez.
Good morning. Hey, Johnny and all. Rick Fernandez. I'm the Hispanic representative at large. Been on the committee since 2017, I think, if I remember correctly.
Morning, Rick. Next is Terrence Trott.
Morning, this is Terrence, African American at large representative. I think I've been around since about 2017 also. If that's what Rick says, I think we came in the same time. Yep, down in the Riverview area, trying to just make sure we can all get where we need to go and keep it safe for those walking and riding.
All right, Chair, that's everyone that's logged on virtually.
We had someone join us here in the room. We're doing self-introductions.
Good morning, everyone. Nicholas Glover, appointed by Hart. Always good to be here with you all.
Morning, Nick. All right. Next item on our agenda will be the period for public comment. There is no one here in the room for public comment. Johnny, is anyone signed up online?
I'm not sure if they're signed up, but we have an attendee that I don't recognize, Leah Lilly. I'll unmute you if you want to provide public comment.
Okay.
And no comments in the chat, Chair.
Well, we will close the public comment portion of the meeting. Your agenda shows that the minutes need to be approved, but this is a meeting where we do not have an in-person forum, so we will defer approval of those minutes from the June meeting until our next gathering in August. So let's get right into it with the status report. Are we following the agenda, or do we have?
Excuse me, Chair.
Yes.
Hi, Don Skelton
Yes.
is online as well. He's having audio issues, and it looks like Hoyt Prindle is on as well. And he is self-muted if he wishes to speak.
Yes. Good morning. Can you hear me? I think you can hear me, but maybe not see me.
Can hear you.
Yeah, I didn't have anything to say. I just was acknowledging that yes, I am here, and I'm assuming you cannot see me, only hear me.
Yes, that's right.
Good. Well,
Okay. Thank you.
Don, are you there?
All right, Chair. Ed said in the chat that it's a little tough to hear people who are present in the room. I'm going to ping our IT team to see if they can work on fixing the mics. Maybe in the meantime, anyone in the room can just speak up a little bit. And I'm going to give screen controls over to Christine Williams and Richard Rank.
Morning, Christine. Welcome. You've got the screen.
Hello, excuse me, can you hear me? This is Richard Rank from Hillsborough County. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, I wanted to, this is Richard Rank from Hillsborough County Community and Infrastructure Planning. I'm here to introduce Christine and the Corridor Preservation Plan work that we've been doing. Early this year, we completed a corridor planning and preservation best practices study in anticipation of the recently started corridor preservation plan update. Purposes of the best practice study is to provide insight and guidance on the current state of the practice in Florida, best practices within the state, and also best practices nationally, focusing on multimodal corridor planning and preservation. The recommendations included in this study provide guidance on future corridor planning needs. Christine Williams will be doing the bulk of the presentation. She directs the Planning and Corridor Management Program at Qatar, the Center for Urban Transportation Research at USF. She's a multimodal planning specialist, transportation land use policy analyst, and national authority on access management. Some of her specialties include, but are not limited to, corridor preservation, which is what we're here for, multimodal planning, which this is part of, thoroughfare planning, transportation equity, land use, and transportation policy. So without further ado, Christine, if you're on, and I think you are, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Richard. Appreciate it, and good morning, everyone. Sorry I don't have my video on, but I do want to make sure we have good connectivity here. So as Richard already mentioned, the objectives of the research that I did for the county were to get a sense of what's the current legal context for corridor preservation and the best practices, not only in Florida, but also around the country, and synthesize that for the county as it proceeds to update the corridor plan. And in terms of the findings, I think I can confidently say that Florida's legal context for corridor preservation and management is quite strong, continues to be one of the strongest in the nation, given our strong Florida planning law, and it also extends to a multimodal plan in light of the changes that we saw in 2011 and continue to see as local governments adopt mobility plans and fees and mechanisms to make sure that their plans are proceeding in light of legal guidelines. And we also found that the thoroughfare plans are increasingly context sensitive with a focus on complete streets and recognizing area types that are more compact and walkable. And that having redundancy or more than one route in the major thoroughfare network is really important to relieving congestion, as we might already know, and making the system more resilient in responding to incidents like crashes or flooding. And having a good connected local street network is also important, especially to placemaking and alternative non-auto modes of transportation. They asked us to look at technology as well, and emerging technology and resiliency plans. We didn't find a lot on that, but we are seeing some movement into smart road classification systems, and that those may require additional right-of-way and really should be considered in planning the designation of corridors. So we organized our findings in these 4 broad categories that I just mentioned, and I'll touch on a few examples of those for you today. One of them was Fort Worth. We thought was quite interesting, a master thoroughfare plan completely grounded in a complete streets and multimodal philosophy with some procedures for flexibility. So let's take a look at what that looks like. They didn't use the traditional functional classes that we're used to, like arterial, collector, or local, but instead they developed their own street typology, and they didn't have separate area types or context zones that you'll see in some plans, but these street types, rather, they kind of refer to area type in their definition. For example, you have activity streets that are more pedestrian oriented. Those are your with the on-street cafes and so forth, or a mixed use street in a downtown area, or your typical commercial strip, your commercial connector. So they built some of that into their designations. And no single map automatically assigns these generalized right-of-way widths. Instead, they code them and they walk through in terms of the different plans that they already have a series of maps to determine what the right-of-way width, starting with your street type, how many lanes, is there transit on that route? Is it a bus rapid transit route or some kind of special transit service? What type of median are they going to incorporate into that type of roadway? Is there on-street parking or off-street parking? And what type of bicycle facilities in terms of their bike plans and so forth? And they have a number of other technical criteria that they do consider. What is the volume, the speed that they're trying to achieve, and so forth. So all of that feeds into a coding system that they use to determine what elements that street is going to contain. And based on those elements, what is the implied right-of-way width? And this is just an example of a neighborhood connector street that they've given in their plan to illustrate and indicated that it would also have a median and no on-street parking in this case, a separated bike lane. And so each of their streets goes through this type of special analysis to determine what the right-of-way width is. And in terms of flexibility, it's a regulatory plan. So it does carry the force of regulation. So it's important to have some flexibility in applying it. Now, they do full updates and overhauls every 5 or 10 years, it said. And they do have a process for amendments that are either administrative or commission, depending upon the nature of the amendment, and waivers, recognizing that not every thoroughfare can accommodate all cross-section elements that might be called for by that coding process and analysis. Or perhaps constructing the full plan cross-section might be too costly. So in these cases, they might have to sacrifice some of the elements, they might have to delay or reduce the cross-section. And there is some guidance on prioritizing elements by street type. So it wouldn't always be the non-auto elements that get thrown out, in other words. And they do have special street types and exceptions for those special types of streets as well. So they have quite a comprehensive process. Kind of turning to Indianapolis, Marion County, which is a bigger area, more like Hillsborough County, not quite as large. Adopted in 2018. It's called their 2020 Thoroughfare Plan. It's part of their comprehensive plan, just like we do here in Florida, because our law allows that as an optional element of your comprehensive plan. And they use more traditional classification types. They use area types, 2 area types. And then they have a standard table of right-of-way widths and design guidelines that creates some prototypical thoroughfare designations. And so here you can see just the compact context area and the metro context area. So the compact being more walkable. So there's only 2 area types. And then the traditional, freeway, arterial collector type of designations that are mapped. And this is a right-of-way standards and design guidelines table. These are all kind of illustrated in our report and also links to them online if you want to take a look at them if you can't see this very well. But here you can see the arterial in a compact area, whether it's 6, 4, 2 lanes. They have a maximum right-of-way and a minimum right-of-way width. And then they walk through different elements that they may have on that type of roadway and going all the way down to, and then they have a metro version and so forth. So they do this for every general corridor designation. Looking at Broward County, which has had this countywide traffic ways plan in place for, since the 60s. And Broward County has mapped what they also, just by the way, they adopted the MPO adopted complete streets guidelines a while back. And so taking this into the next generation, they've allowed the designation of context sensitive corridors. And these can fall into one of 3 categories: urban core, urban main street, you see, or urban residential. And those corridors then are tied to specific plans for the right-of-way, and the local government can come in and request the Broward Countywide Planning Council to amend the map and to adopt their cross-section. And that's how it works in Broward County. This is a small town, but I thought it was interesting. And Texas does have a long history of thoroughfare planning, as you saw with Fort Worth example. But in the city of Bastrop, this is a what they call a street master plan. And they have land use regulations that establish a street grid as their framework for moving forward on growth. So it's very compact. They indicated that the driver for this change was they wanted to start to mitigate flooding and provide resilience to wildfires as well. So I thought it's an interesting approach that might be enacted in some of our community planning areas in Hillsborough County that want to achieve a more compact growth and placemaking. That some of them, many of them had town centers in the community plans. So they might use some of these types of strategies as to complement the corridor plan. NCHRP, the Transportation Research Board, funds major national studies, and this one looked at the concept of right-sizing roadways and arterials. And one of the things that it noted was that a regular grid, which this idea has been around for many, many years, can, as I mentioned earlier, result in smaller thoroughfares and provide more resilience and alternative routes in the network. And what they did was take an idealized grid and they overlaid it onto Salt Lake City, to give you an example of how that might work. And what the idealized grid would look like in the context of Salt Lake, you know, if you could just do that, but obviously one can't because there are a variety of constraints that might prevent that from being built. And then they compared it to the current 2040 roadway plan, which is rather sparse in many areas of the county, and identified here are some of the urgent areas that we need to start preserving from development. And here's some that we need to decide soon and some to add later. And by doing this, they could avoid the problem of having to continually widen the same arterial corridors over and over again, which I think research has shown ultimately may not solve congestion. And so that having that redundancy in the network is a better approach. So that was an interesting idea. And Indian River County is one of these counties that has been doing a grid network for many, many years. This is their extended roadway grid network map, and they also provide logical extensions of roadways to undeveloped portions of the county. And they enforce a subdivision collector map. And one of the reasons I think we have a sparser network, we don't have as many collectors in the system as we could, and that helps build out that connected system. One of the comments in our interviews with them was that this really does help their transit system operate a lot more efficiently as well. So they're requiring developers to build in these collectors as they go out into beyond the urban service area. And so high-tech corridors, the county asked us to think about that. And we did find some smart road classification systems that are being developed both abroad, internationally in Europe, and also here in the US through that Transportation Research Board study process, to think about what do we do when vehicles become autonomous and we start to designate those routes, and they may require additional right-of-way. So we might start to think about anticipating where those routes are and whether we need to start preserving right-of-way for those designations, but also just planning them differently. And the electric vehicles, they were talking this morning about we might have reached that point where electric vehicles are going to be like cell phones where everyone's adopting them. So we're going to need a lot more electric vehicle charging stations, and Florida DOT has identified where those should go statewide, and the county could also start drilling down and looking within the county where we might add additional electric vehicle charging areas, and perhaps that does require some right of way depending on how those areas are designed. Does the public want to incentivize the location of charging stations in certain areas along thoroughfares? And there are, of course, studies going on about How do we respond to sea level rise and extreme storm events? And the Tampa Bay Pilot Program study is one of those, which has identified, using this kind of methodology, vulnerability and criticality. Where are the highly vulnerable and highly critical routes within the Hillsborough County broader metropolitan area? And what can we do? So that might be another area where, oh, some of these routes are going to need to be beefed up, so to speak. So we might need to have a little additional right of way in order to build them up, to protect them from these events so they continue to operate. And we also might need to avoid certain areas. So these are also helpful for the corridor plan. And I've already mentioned redundancy in the network, and even providing parallel thoroughfares or collectors that run along these major routes, like this one, this roundabout road along US 98 in the Florida Panhandle was built to help alleviate some of the traffic on that route, but it also provides an alternative way to get traffic in and out in the event of an incident or evacuation. So starting to look at, can we start to preserve right of way as development occurs along some of these routes for these parallel corridors. So this is just a summary of all of that. We thought having a clear and integrated vision of that future system, the corridor plan really does give us a mechanism for doing that, and still making it flexible and accommodating all the different modes of transportation, incorporating some of these grid concepts, technology, redundancy of the network, and of course, money is always the bottom line, right? And to establish some dedicated funding source for these projects and right-of-way acquisition. So I'm going to stop here and turn it back to Richard, who's going to talk about next steps, and then we'll answer some questions that you may have.
Thank you. Yes, next steps is, as I indicated, we're just starting a year-plus long project in terms of updating the corridor preservation plan. We want to make sure it's consistent with the mobility element of the comprehensive plan, where we build and maintain a transportation system that supports the needs of all users with respect to ability, resources, identity, and mode preference. In the past, the plan has probably been admittedly more auto-centric. We're looking at a comprehensive multimodal plan this time around. Next slide, please. So with that, we're looking at a context-based classification system now that's in our mobility plan, where we're looking at, creating livable communities, considering what the future land uses are, and integrating transportation policies toward that context-based classification system. So that will kind of be the foundation, or help us move forward with corridor preservation. Next slide. So the summary of the process we're at is implementing the vision established in the comprehensive plan that I mentioned, identifying the transportation network by function, area type, context, modal accommodations, really just kind of drilling down, looking at and identifying opportunities to support network concepts such as shared use paths. We're just starting with the scenario building, and so we'll be developing scenarios that look at new technology for the mobility system. We'll optimize the network, and finally analyze and identify methods and procedures to manage projects, set aside right-of-way as part of the development review process. So our schedule is here. We started in April, actually more like May. We're in the process of developing performance measures. We're doing our travel demand estimations right now, just seeing what's out there on the network. Our build out year is even beyond the long range transportation plan of 2045 or 2050. So we're really looking at truly a vision beyond that, and that's not an easy thing to do. We have, no idea what's really going to be happening concretely 40, 50 years into the future. But we look at these things that Christine talked about, new technologies. We're looking at alternative modes of transportation. So those all are part of our plan, and developing performance measures as part of that plan. So we reach out to groups such as you for input when the time is right. We've developing focus groups and targeted stakeholders as part of the process along the way. So we should have, we'll be coming back to you with some initial results later on. And hopefully by the end of the year-long process in April, May of 2023, we'll have a workable corridor preservation plan update. Next slide. I think that was it. Yep. So with that, we open up any questions to Christine or myself about the best practices guide. I went ahead and put on the chat. I think it was included in your packet, a link to the document itself, but it's also in the chat. Feel free to peruse it at your leisure.
All right, thank you, Richard and Christine. Appreciate it. Are there questions from the committee? I'll start here in the room. Anyone have questions or comments? Anyone online have questions of Richard or Christine regarding the presentation? Lot to digest. Yes, Christine Acosta.
Good morning. Great presentation. I always think it's so valuable when we do a deep dive into what other communities are doing, especially when they share some geography with us, such as the Sun Belt. Texas is known for its car build out just as much as Florida. So it's especially interesting to me. Christine, I always love hearing you speak. So I enjoyed that.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you a couple things. I noticed in the Fort Worth table that you shared that they had a notation of which bicycle facility type. It did not seem that they were indicating whether or not a bicycle facility would be considered, but rather which type. And I just wondered if that, if you got a sense of whether or not they're doing, like, they aspire to say 100% bicycle facility deployment through using the various types. And then I wanted to ask Robert if he could tell us a little bit more about the methodology for the travel demand estimates. Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Sure. So with Fort Worth, they have a separate bicycle planning effort going on, and they do have bicycle types built into the street type. So they are considering that as part of their street type designations, and that was one of the issues that I was getting at. And so they are thinking about where they want to have a separate bike path or where they want to put bike lanes and so forth. And they're also using other separate technical criteria as they go in and look at each of these street type designations in a given context, whether they're going to be able to fit this type or that type in those areas. So they kind of drill down based on all of those items.
What was the second question?
I was wondering if you could share, thank you, Christine. I was wondering if you could share a little bit more information about what it means to assess the travel demand, to identify the travel demand estimates according to your calendar. That's already been done, or maybe it's stretched into July without color coding the month of July. But there's been a lot of conversation over the years about whether or not the travel demand estimation tools are very accurate. So I wanted your a little more information on that, and if you have any comments on the validity of the tools.
Well, as someone who uses the tools, I would defend those tools, but they are auto-centric. That is true. They're based off of assumptions of land uses and projections of those land uses. You start with the calibration of the model. So you have to replicate what's on the ground now. Every 5 years, that's done for the long range transportation plan. Now try to predict what, travel demand is going to be 40 years into the future. Good luck. It is based off of a number of assumptions of how that socioeconomic those patterns will grow, the employment growth, the population growth, and where that population is going to grow and where those employment centers are going to be. So it's a first cut, and it's a rough cut, and it certainly looks at and it's certainly autocentric. That's what it was built off of. It's a gravity model. People tend to try to work closer to where they live, but not always. And with new technologies, such as AV and EV, on-demand driving, who knows? That's going to be a concern, is that if I don't have to drive my car and it's automated, maybe I don't have to live as close to where I work as I used to. So those are things that have to be kind of considered, or that we're trying to consider in the model. It looks at transit, yes, but maybe not as accurately as we would like. And certainly lacks in terms of other modes of transportation. The current models do. There are some that are, kind of drilling down into person-based activities. But we use it as a first cut. We use it as a estimate of where we think that demand is going to be. And then we'll, as in the past, we'll look at opportunities for not just, a corridor that's autocentric. We'll be looking at opportunities for facilities for other modes of transportation. Like, one of the problems as we looked at the last corridor preservation plan are a number of facilities that are lost to us because of development occurred in a place that we were hoping to keep away from a new facility. Now, that right-of-way for that facility would have been autocentric. Maybe we can squeeze in something that can accommodate, bike travel, or, a pathway or something like that, drilling down into some way better than an automobile to get from point A to point B, or at least providing that opportunity. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question. It's a tool that we use, and it's the best thing that we've got to at least give us an understanding of where that demand is going to be. And I know, I'm the, one of those people that use it, and I understand its limitations. Certainly when you're looking, far out into the future, and it's not just EVs and AVs, Uber and a number of other facilities are looking at drone type methods of transportation to get goods and services from one place to another. So how would we include air travel into this? Part of our effort is, as part of this exercise, is to bring together people that have a better understanding of these new technologies than maybe I do, or my consultant. Our consultant is looking at these people to try to find another way of thinking about corridor preservation.
Thank you. Very good answer. Very detailed. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Christine. Other questions from committee members online? Johnny,
I don't see anyone in the chat, Chair. They can unmute themselves. I think we've unmuted everyone. I'm not seeing any comments in the chat.
all right. Well, Christine and Richard, thank you very much for your presentation. Lots of good information in there. We'll look forward to hearing from you in the future and seeing a completed report next spring.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. The next item on our agenda is the Tampa Vision Zero implementation through maintenance program. Cal, are you going to do this presentation still?
Cal, you're self-muted. I just gave you control. If you're having Wi-Fi issues, let me know and I can scroll through the slides for you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Here, I'm going to share my screen. Can you else see the screen?
Yeah, we can see the screen. You're breaking up a little bit on the audio.
Or the old screen? Oh, sorry. All right. Well, I hope it gets through. Just let me know. Just break in if I'm breaking up. Just let me know.
Okay.
Okay. I'm trying to hide the panel. There we go. All right. Sorry. All right. So I'm here today to talk to y'all about the City of Tampa's Vision Zero through maintenance, how we try to accomplish our Vision Zero goals through our maintenance program. So when Mayor Jane Castor took office, she did have some goals for transportation. And some of those include implement strategic transit projects, focus on trails and greenways as transportation options, adopt Vision Zero as a citywide policy, reinvent urban parking and mobility, and enhance neighborhood engagement. As part of that, we did something called Tampa Moves. It's an ongoing, basic 30-year framework of how we plan our projects. Based off of a few guiding principles: mobility for all, economic opportunity, vision for strong neighborhoods, transportation equity, and public safety. So that's kind of just the beginning, but I always bring up this slide because I was just wondering if anybody knew what a man had in common with Jurassic Park and why it would be in this presentation. Well, those were all hit movies and songs in 1993, and that was the last time that gas tax was raised. So gas tax is levied cents per gallon. It's not a percentage of the total price. It hasn't been raised in 28 years since 1993, when it was raised from 14.1 cents to 18.4 cents. Gas tax is not pegged to inflation, which rose 87% from 1993 to 2022. So $1 in 1993 is worth $2 today. So we actually lost a lot of our purchasing power. Both those numbers at 87% in their purchasing power are actually older numbers. It's probably even worse now with the recent increase in inflation. So if we were to increase fuel tax to what it should be to get the same purchasing power as 1993, it would have to be 34.4 cents per gallon. At the same time, fuel efficiency has gone up tremendously, and so is electric vehicle adoption. So people are buying fewer gallons of gas to get to drive the same amount of distance. With all that, one of the other things is that fuel tax is slated to decrease, actually. So we're looking at losing our fuel tax dollars in the upcoming years. At the same time, from 1993 to 2020, this is the same time period that we were talking about earlier, our vehicle or the amount of vehicles have gone up on the road from 3.7 to close to 5 million vehicles. The other thing that has happened is our trucks and our single unit trucks have gone up 120%, and our combination trucks have gone up 72%. The reason why I bring that up is that our pavements, actually, the reason why pavements deteriorate is basically they deteriorate with use. And when we look at pavements, we actually consider truckloads more than cars, because our truckloads are actually what really damage pavements. So if you have a lot of trucks in there, you have to beef up the pavement section pretty good. But so with the increase in truck travel, it really has done a number on our pavements. The other thing is, as pavement goes through its life cycle, the older it gets and the condition it is, the faster it degrades and the more expensive and costlier the repair. So it takes a lot longer for a pavement to go from good to fair than it does from fair to poor. And then when it does hit that poor condition, you're looking at a much larger cost for repair. So our maintenance needs are about, well, we get about $9 million a year in gas tax total. That's what we budget for each year. It is starting to go down in the upcoming years, where we're going to have to be budgeting for a little bit less. That's our only source of continuous source of funding for the city of Tampa. Right now, we put about 54% of that gas tax into street resurfacing itself. So everything else that we have, the 46%, pays for all of our complete streets, our intersection improvements, our Vision Zero projects, our bridges, our seawalls, and sidewalks. So if we were to look at the actual needs for the entirety of our maintenance, just maintenance, we have a $40 million per year need, and we have a $5.4 million budget right now. Currently, we are on a 75-year paving cycle. So when we talk about, we kind of bring this up, if your street's gotten repaved in the city of Tampa, you likely won't see that again in your lifetime right now. Most pavements are designed to last for about 25 years, so it kind of shows the condition of where we are right now. So that's not the only issue that we have. The big issue that we have is that our streets are unsafe. On average, each year, 44 people are killed on our roads and 290 people are severely injured. In 2021, we had 81 fatalities, including 31 ped and 6 bikes. At that same average, when we were averaging 44 and 290, San Francisco averaged 27 fatal crashes, with more than twice the population. So we definitely have an issue in this area. So with our Vision Zero goal to eliminate all roadway deaths and life-altering injuries while increasing safe, healthy, equitable mobility for all, we need to get smart and we need to start making our dollars stretch. So incorporating safety improvements into maintenance projects and prioritizing high injury network corridors really help us get to that closer to that goal. So this is just this slide I just threw in there from another presentation, but basically the idea is to look at safer streets as a safe systems approach for our Vision Zero, but I just wanted to kind of throw in there that we are focusing and looking at our maintenance needs, but also looking through the lens of our high injury network to make sure that we are considering the high injury network as part of a prioritization of our collector road resurfacing. So when we do these projects, when we do collector road resurfacing, what we can do, we do have some opportunities to add some complete street elements. So the first thing is we design to our target speed. A lot of these roadways, because our pavement maintenance dollar is little, and we have to kind of we have a longer term on our between resurfacings. A lot of these roadways haven't been resurfaced in like 35 years, 40 years, something like that. And if you think about it, even when it was resurfaced 35 years ago, back then they just replaced the same striping as they had. So who knows when that design was made? We could be dealing with 75-year-old designs. So the problem that we have with that is it's 75-year-old contacts. The neighborhoods have changed. The surrounding context of the roadway has changed. The design standards have changed. Even since I moved started working for the city, the changes have been immense in the design standards. Even like lane sizes. Back when I first started with the city only 7 years ago, you couldn't do a 10-foot lane. It wasn't allowed per DOT standards. So that was the thing that changed in like 2013 or 2014. So anyway, we're looking at designing to our target speed. Think about what the roadway should, at the speed that the roadway should operate, and design towards that. Look at speed limit reductions, narrow lanes, enhance the signage and striping, and add some horizontal and vertical deflection. We can also accommodate alternative modes, such as bike lanes, which are more than just bike lanes, they're micromobility lanes. E-bikes, scooters, everything by law can use those. So it's really becoming more of a transportation choice there. Add bike parking, add delineators and separators, add conflict markings, and include better transit accommodations. And this is a good one to point out, because that often just means moving a flag for a bus stop to a nearby. If we're going to put in a crosswalk, moving the flag to the crosswalk and just coordinating with HART so that they have a better place that's actually easier to get to for their transit stops. And then build for people. Add frequent, safe, enhanced crosswalks. We're actually developing our own standard on minimum crossing distance, meaning distance between crosswalks. We generally put it in at where they make sense for tractors, but also where just at a frequent clip, so that people don't have to walk, 400 feet out of the way to get to the nearest crosswalk, because they're not going to do that. Add curb extensions and painted bulb outs, refuge islands, and also raised crosswalks. So I'm going to go through a few of these that we've done. This is a right side. This is a project that was actually part of a DOT lab project. This is one of our 3 top crash corridors in the city at the time. And it's Hyde Park and Plant Avenues. This one is Hyde Park Avenue, I believe, is the southbound one. But you can kind of see on the left what I mean by old design standards. That is what the only striping you have on that road is. I don't even know if y'all can even see it. There's an old dilapidated little skip, 1030 skip line, center line. That's the only striping you have for the entire road. And that roadway was probably about 42 feet wide. So in essence, when there's no parking on the side of the road, which actually there's no parking sign there, you have a 21 foot wide travel lane. So you can imagine speeds and how that would be bad for pedestrians and everything. So when we look at right sizing, it doesn't necessarily mean lane dieting. We didn't take out a lane here, but what we did was actually allocate the space and kind of designate the space. This is an older project, and if we were to do this now, we probably would have flipped the bike in parking. But you can kind of see how much of a difference it makes from the super wide lanes to more designated roadway. And then other elements. This was a recent project we did on Davis Boulevard. It has all the elements that are listed on the left. First is a curb extension. This curb extension I like to bring out to, and I kind of put it out to all the engineers as a really easy way to design something that is a little bit cheaper, because if you look at it here, there's we kept the flow line open, so the water actually goes through. When you design these curb extensions, the thing that our maintenance crews hate are those little ADA grates that you see kind of downtown a lot, where the water flows through the grate. Those things clog up with leaves all the time. So this was kind of a really easy, cheap way to actually get a safety feature without having to move curb or anything like that. We added conflict markings and we added the bike lane. We put a new crosswalk in the background, if you can see here, with an RRFB in a refuge island. And then we enhanced the signage and fixed the curb ramps to be ADA accessible. This is another example of a pedestrian bulb out that we did over on Burreen/Cleveland, right when you get over the Burreen Street Bridge. And again, we kept the flow line open, and we just installed a few concrete islands. So it was a pretty easy, simple installation that we were able to, you can kind of put in anywhere because you're not really having to move any kind of drainage structure. You can see the drainage structure is actually right here. So if we were to block this up, you either had to put an inlet here or do one of those ADA grates. But if you just put the crosswalk at street level and then just build some islands, it's kind of a cheap way to retrofit. And then other elements that we've added in the past, this is also on Davis Boulevard. It's just a burn down symbol for the pedestrian crosswalk here. What was happening was there's kind of like a blind curve that you're coming off at speed off the main strip. So you couldn't really see the sign. So we put something on the pavement directly so that you could actually alert the driver to the crosswalk before they could actually see the sign. And then on Harbor Island, we did a project where we actually added a bike lane to the bridge and then threw up some delineators. The nice thing about this is that in addition to providing a little bit more secure feeling while crossing the bridge for cyclists, it also puts traffic away from pedestrians. So it's a much nicer walk than having traffic right up against the pedestrian sidewalk there. So it gives a little bit more separation. So this was Davis Boulevard before, and this was after. This is also on Davis Boulevard. I mentioned horizontal and vertical deflection. This is a raised crosswalk that we did there. And we did a little bit, we took the standard detail that kind of floats around the standard raised crosswalk design and modified it a bit to create a little bit more of a speed control. The up ramp, the ramp that goes up, is typically 12 feet. We just modified it to go 10 feet so that it's a little bit more abrupt, but they work well for speed control. And this was something that you can also retrofit. This is the 88 grate I was talking about. On this one, we couldn't, because it's raised, you have to raise everything. So you kind of have to do an 88 grate there. This is another one on Harbor Island. You know, on Harbor Island, we put these raised crosswalks and replaced some speed humps that they actually had on the roadway that were existing. And the speed humps that they had were some of the most aggressive speed humps I've ever driven over. They really, I mean, your car would shake when you went over them. And I was worried when we took those out and put these series of raised crosswalks in, where we're going to get people complaining that they don't work as well as speed humps, but we haven't. And in fact, I think they work better, because what was happening with the speed humps was drivers would go over and then slow down to a very, very slow speed, but then they would go over and then accelerate like crazy to the next one. And with these, you can kind of go over them. We took it at 25 miles per hour, which is the speed limit, and it's not easy to go at 25. So you generally have to slow down to about 15. But people don't speed up that much in between because they're not that frustrated for having to stop, go to like 0. So basically, people might speed up a little bit, but by the time they get to the next one, they're slowing down to 15 again. And then it's not just resurfacing. This is our plans for the Berwyn Street Bridge. Currently, there's 4 lanes on that bridge. If you ever walked on it, or ridden your bike on it, it's pretty scary. The sidewalks are very narrow. There's traffic railing on the side of the bridge, but it's meant for vehicles, so it's really low. So if you're on your bike on the actual sidewalk portion, the traffic railing is about calf level, and there's no separation from the vehicles and the pedestrians. So we were looking at removing a lane. The lane itself, it's a very dangerous merge situation. There's a lot of confusion coming off because people don't realize which lane to get into if they want to go to Bayshore, if they want to go to Cleveland. So there's a lot of merging that happens, and it's not really ideal. So what we're looking at is we actually removed one of the lanes in this inside lane. It's the markings on the rendering are wrong, but this is actually going to be a choice lane. So you can either turn left to Bayshore or go straight. So we didn't really lose any capacity because we provided, it's basically 3.5 lanes if you think about it, because you can go either way there. But with what we were able to do, or what we will be able to do to take, when we take out that lane, is that we're actually able to do 8-foot sidewalks on both sides, minimum, and that's clear space. And then add traffic railing between the vehicles and the pedestrians so that it will be protected. And then that also allows us to do bike railing on the outside of the bridge. So it's a much higher rail that, you know, provides a little bit more protection from falling into the river. And we are also able to, we'll be able to match the Riverwalk aesthetic and the lighting so that it all kind of looks like a Riverwalk extension going from one side of the river to the next side, and the other side is going to have its own Riverwalk on it pretty soon. So when we're looking at this project, this altogether is a $13 million project. The delta in cost to do what I just said, it was $300,000. So it was a tiny percentage of the overall cost. So it was a no-brainer to actually institute this. When we look at our roadway projects that we have, our maintenance projects, like Davis Boulevard, it's about a 15% increase to add all those elements for the complete street elements. And I'm talking about everything, including the bike lanes, over if we were just to restripe it the way it was. So the really, and that's, I wouldn't even say it's a fair, I'm putting a lot into that 15%. So it really is probably even less than that if you really want to get technical about it. But it's really not a big increase in cost to do these safety projects with our maintenance projects. So this last slide is just to, if y'all want any more information on Vision Zero or Tampa Moves, you can scan the QR code. And then I'd always like to point out our website, tampamoves.org. That's a way that you can provide feedback to us, let us know where their issues are, let us know what you want to see and how you want your city to develop. That's all I have. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Cal. Appreciate it. Questions from anyone here in the room or comments on the Zero presentation? Other than the fact that you don't have a lot of money to work with. How about questions from committee members online? Johnny, you seeing any?
Yeah, I do. Cal, Rick Fernandez asked for an update on the Flora Bresca Complete Street project, specifically the pork chop raised median, or sorry, not median, refuge island near the Flora Bresca off-ramp.
Yeah, we're still working on the interchange report, but that's still within the plans, Rick. We were looking, I talked to DOT the other day, not DOT, our consultant that's actually working on it, and I don't think that's the pork chop's going to be an issue. So the southbound through movement, in other words, I think that's going to be the same as we proposed.
All right. Next in the chat, Ed Majerski asked if there are any plans to be aware of in the new Tampa area.
Yeah, actually, I just had a meeting last night. We did Tampa Palms Boulevard. We did a public meeting. If you go to the City of Tampa's webpage and then just search, and there's a search box, just search Tampa Palms Boulevard, and you go down, it's like the 4th link or so. But we will have the recording up there in a couple of days, so you can see that. But we already have the presentation. That project, we were originally looking at doing a lane diet there because Tampa Palms Boulevard has excess capacity, but we faced a lot of resistance, and we didn't push back too much on it because they have a trail, so we were looking at doing a lane diet. It was more for traffic calming than to actually provide a multimodal choice. So, but we are looking at adding crosswalks and doing some speed cushions as well on that roadway.
No more questions in the chat. I see Christine has her hand raised.
Christine DeCosta.
Big surprise, right? Christine's going to chime in. Thank you, Cal. It's always so great to see what's in the pipeline, and I appreciate like the way the blend, making the most out of every possible maintenance nickel and dime that we spend is just so critical. So I'm really, really happy to see all this stuff. I was wondering, I had the opportunity to attend when the Platt and Cleveland bike facilities were being brought out in a community engagement, and they were originally planned to have that design you mentioned about the on-street car parking, then the bike facility, then the sidewalk or the curb and sidewalk. And I know that you've had your sights set on that, doing that. You mentioned it a minute ago, but when are we going to see any of that on the ground? Like, what's your hope as far as like the first project would look like that, so that community members can begin to appreciate that it's an option we can encourage and advocate for?
Yeah, so I was actually looking at Davis Boulevard, but I got stuck within minimum. So I couldn't, I was basically like a foot short where I could not fit it behind the parking aisle. So that's not one, but we do have a few projects where we are instituting it. One, our downtown core complete streets project, and that's on Tampa, Florida, and Burreen and Whiting. So it's quite a bit, but it's right around the Burreen Street Bridge, that kind of area. We'll be doing parking protective bike lanes on both Florida and Tampa. And then the other one that we have is Platt Street itself with our West River Build Grant. We're going to be redoing Platt Street from, I think it's Delaware. It's or maybe let's just say Fielding all the way to Bayshore. And so that's a complete redo where we're going to be flipping it and actually adding protected, like physical protection to the bike lane. So we'll be able to kind of do that redo that we were trying to do, or back then. It's rare that you get a chance to, that we get a chance to redo something within the last, that's been resurfaced within the last 10 years. So that's a good one.
Yeah, great. I'm really looking forward to actually seeing that in action. I know it's when we do manage to get a striped bike lane, if it's in the door swing zone, it's, a lot of people just won't, that still contains an element of fear, that door swing, because we just don't teach drivers to look for cyclists coming over their shoulder. But so thank you, and go for it. The other thing I wanted to ask you, when you we're talking about how dynamic these street contexts were, especially like what you've seen in your 7 years with the city. It seems like one of the most dynamic elements in our community would be restaurant openings, and sometimes a business is the catalyst for a lot of people crossing the street. And I noticed in Ybor, the Columbia Restaurant Group did, it seems, make appeal to connect their parking lot to the latest business they've added in Ybor with an RRFB crosswalk. I don't think it's a raised crosswalk, but it is just you know which one I'm talking about. And I just wondered, is there any kind of programming where the city or county will enable business owners to make those appeals, or is it kind of just the Richard Gonsmart level of stakeholder?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that one, because that was a city, and it was a P3 effort. Like, it was actually a private-public partnership on that one. So they provided funding, we did the design, and we built it. So it was, or they provided some of the funding. We kicked in a little bit too. But that's a lot of things that we can do a lot of those. And in fact, we're trying to increase our availability to do a little bit more with the P3 stuff, and then actually just kind of look into more 501(c)(3)s for like our Vision Zero quick builds and stuff like that as well. So we're kind of looking into that a little bit more to see how we can get additional, I don't want to say funding, but because it's not like funding, it's more like for a specific cause, but things like that.
Partnerships. Yeah.
Yeah, partnerships
Okay.
to get things done throughout the city.
That would be great. Looking forward to that. Thanks.
See another, it's actually a two-part question in the chat from Terrence Trott. Cal, I'll start with the simpler of the two questions, and I think I know the answer, but he wants to know, how are the paint colors chosen for markings? And I'm assuming we're talking about conflict zones and bike lanes. Terrence, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, that's pretty good, Johnny. Thanks. That is correct. I just noticed in one of the slides, and it caught me that, you know, the white striping was kind of blending in with the pavement color as the pavement faded over the years. And I was just wondering, like, how come, you know, sharper colors weren't used? Because I see in some of the projects that are done, you know, the low expense projects, there's different, you know, brighter, such as that green color used. Is there a standard? Is it, I know some are because of, like, a statute possibly or law, but
Yeah, it's a standard. There's a manual put out by FHWA, which is Federal Highway Administration, called the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, and it's a nationwide manual that basically controls what colors you use, what kind of striping you use, so everything's uniform throughout the country. And it's funny that you mentioned the pavement. So there are some things that you can do on faded pavement, and I've seen this done on asphalt, not just concrete, but generally on concrete, you'll see something called contrast marking, where you have a black underline and then the white stripe on top of it. And that kind of gives you both something dark to see during the day and then the white to see at night. So it kind of, so it doesn't fade in. But it's funny that you mentioned that, because with the faded asphalt, because we actually had the Bloomberg Associates, it's a team of like transportation professionals, and they came down for a visit, and they were really they were asking us what we put in the pavement, because everybody's been trying to get their pavements white to lower the heat island. And they're like, why, what additive do you do to your pavement? And I'm like, that's just oxidation. So like, we don't do anything to make the pavements actually turn white, but they, over here, because of the sun, I guess, it just oxidizes that way. But they're I guess they were like, oh, this is great, because this is what cities across America are like, painting their pavements white in order to reflect some of the sun's rays. And you guys already have it built in. So anyway, but yeah, it's funny how when you go, especially when you go to like the beach, like Tierra Verde, that pavement is like, it looks like asphalt, or it looks like concrete. I can't believe that it's actually asphalt. It's like really white.
all right, yeah, thank you. Yeah, any chance, I would just, you know, say that any chance we have to highlight the markings or make them stand out, like you were saying, it's important, and again, seems to be an affordable step. So thanks for that. And yeah, the second question was just mainly, you know, like you started out the presentation asking, or, you know, demonstrating how you have to stretch the dollars, but I'm trying to figure out, why can't we bring in more dollars? What can we as a committee do? Who can we, you know, ask for help to bring in more dollars? This is a priority in the county. It's a priority for the planning organization. So the dollars should reflect that it's a priority.
Yeah. So the tax structure works where the city of Tampa has ability to raise ad valorem taxes, which are property taxes, things like that. Sales taxes and local option gas tax can be raised to by the Board of County Commissioners. The gas tax can be raised by a penny per gallon, I believe, is what it is, and it's called the 6 cent. But so that's one thing that would raise a few more dollars through gas tax, although gas tax is a dwindling resource. And then sales tax is had to be put onto a referendum by the by either the Board of County Commissioners or the Office of Transportation was done through a citizens action where they actually did it by petition. So that was the Office of Transportation tax, surtax that was voted on and passed, I think, with 57% of the vote in Hillsborough, would have quintupled our budget. We would actually got about $32 million a year from that. So that would have made a big dent in what our annual maintenance needs and safety needs. So, but yeah, that's there's another referendum I know on the November ballot, but I'm not. There's a state law now that says that staff members, agency staff members, city staff members cannot advocate for a tax. So I'm not trying. So we have to be careful about what we say. We can only answer factual questions, but so I'm answering all your questions with facts. That is where that would be something that would raise our budget by quite a bit if that got passed.
Thank you for that. I understand, those funding sources, but can you explain possibly any different allocations? The money we do have as a organization or as a county or state is going somewhere. Can we get a larger allocation of the available funds devoted to Vision
Not
Zero?
really. So you can do it through that. So federal funds that are administered through DOT, they have different programs like a Highway Safety Improvement Program or Transportation Alternatives. Those two in particular, you have to demonstrate a need. So you have to have a crash history, or you have to look at like Transportation Alternatives is basically saying, okay, we're going to build a sidewalk or bike lanes or something like that. The issue with that is if, let's say I apply today and we said, okay, here's a great project that we have a crash need here. You're likely not to see anything on the road for 6 years because it gets approved and then it gets put into the work program and then funding comes in that 6th year because they take applications for basically the next available year, which is usually 6 years away. Sometimes they're able to move it up, but generally that's your next step. And then the other stuff that you have is the new funds that are coming through the federal government, the IUJA funds. That's the new infrastructure bill. They did open it up for the first time to cities. So cities have always had the opportunity to apply for things like Build Grant or Raise. It used to be called Tiger, then it went to Build, then it went to Raise. And that's how we're building the West River build project. That's a $24 million grant that we actually went for. Problem is those are very competitive, but this year they opened up new programs that are actually open to agencies like the city. Whereas before it would go to the state and then the state would decide the projects. So one of the things that President Biden did was kind of open it up to more local access to those funds. But again, those are all very competitive. So you really have to have a good project to go after. We're actually with the Burbank Street Bridge. It's already designed. It's not funded right now, the one I showed, but we will be going after bridge funding for that project.
All right. Yeah. So it sounds like that tax that we did vote for is key here. So I would just say, Mr. Chair, if it's anything we can do to express to the larger TPO the importance of backing that, I would support something like that.
Thank you, Terrence.
Thank you, Cal. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Johnny, anyone else?
I don't see anyone else in the chat, Chair. I think Terrence was the last.
Cal, I'd like to make an observation and maybe have a request. I'm really glad to see all of the pedestrian crossings being designed so carefully and implemented around the city. I know there's probably a lot of need there. There is a potential problem I've observed with some of these pedestrian crossings where the signage and even the crossing itself is in a highly congested area. And as an example, I would point to the new pedestrian crossing on Fortune Avenue near the Strass, where the pedestrian crossing was moved. Signs are still not up, and the crossing itself places pedestrians behind some permanent plants, so that an oncoming vehicle oftentimes can't see the pedestrian from the plant. So I make that observation only to see if, as you go forward, you could take into totality the traffic pattern and what's going on when you relocate these pedestrian crosswalks.
Yeah, and I know which one you're talking about on Fortune Street. That one's always been a problem, even before, because of that. The big issue there is that it's basically a ramp that goes from Ashley Drive to Fortune Street. So we do have plans to tighten up the entirety of that intersection, which will provide a lot better visibility to a pedestrian, because people won't be coming at like 45 miles per hour off the interstate, or probably even faster to go on Fortune Street. So, but yeah, and that also right now, it was a developer project. I don't know if they've actually opened it up, but and one of those locations was supposed to be temporary. So I'm not sure if they actually replaced it and made it permanent yet, or what they did there. So I'll have to check in on that.
Okay, I appreciate that. The observation is as much about the design and the visual distraction to protect the pedestrians who start across the crosswalk and then all of a sudden there's a vehicle that didn't see them. Christina Costa, did you have another comment?
I did, Cal. I wonder if you can shed some light on when developers, I'm observing a lot of, I live in a very heavy pedestrian area of the city, the Soho district, and we have developers that it seems like they have the right, or they just take the opportunity to just close sidewalks for years on end. What is the actual policy? Does a developer, when I go to other cities, the developer has to displace the pedestrian movement, but not completely close it? So can you give any insight on that? I mean, are developers allowed to just close sidewalks willy-nilly and not have any enforcement on that, or what do we do?
No, and Margaret's really done a good job of kind of taking the lead on that one. It depends if they're, the issue that I think might be happening more than anything, Christine, is that if they're not coming in for right-of-way permitting, they're not necessarily getting reviewed by Margaret's team. And Margaret's very good at making sure we have pedestrian detours. So if they're closing down the sidewalks as part of a building permit, even though they're not allowed to do that, that might be where it's kind of where there might be a hole there. Why don't you send in the location, and then I could actually bring it up to Margaret's view, because and the other thing is that might have been going through right-of-way permitting years ago, before Margaret kind of revamped that and put a heavier focus on pedestrians. So that it could be one of those things. But send in the one out, and we can look up the right-of-way permit and see what they have, and see if they have anything.
Thank you. I will do that.
Great question, Christine. It occurs in a number of places, and and it does go on for an extended period of time. So the more we want to make our city Vision Zero compliant and walkable, the more we need to pay attention to these block by block issues. So, Cal, I think that wraps it up. Clearly, there's some interest on this committee's behalf in all that you're doing, and we welcome you to come back and keep us updated.
Yeah, I appreciate the time talking to y'all, and y'all let me know if you need any, would like any more information or anything like that. Thank you.
Certainly will do. Thank you. All right. The next item on our agenda is the Hart fiscal year 23 budget review. Johnny, we're ready to cue that one up?
Chair, I actually think that we canceled that presentation. The presenter said that she wasn't able to make this meeting, so maybe we sent out the wrong agenda. But we're actually going to schedule that presentation for August.
You're right. I'm looking at the first version of the agenda, which I printed at home. I apologize. So we'll skip the Hart fiscal budget presentation and move to the CAC organizational survey.
All right. Yes, that's the right one. Johnny Wong, TPO staff. As you know, I'm also your CAC liaison. And I want to present some options that we have for maybe making the CAC function a little bit better. We actually are, I'm actually presenting this info as a follow-up to a presentation we had scheduled a little bit earlier in the year, I think maybe April or March. And we touched on some potential changes that we think might help improve the efficiency and the functioning of the CAC. And now I'm hoping to work toward closing that loop and bringing this to a final conclusion. Before I get into the slides, I want to take a moment to maybe take a little bit of pressure or any potential tension out of this, because not just myself, but staff and our director, of course, really feel that the CAC is a valuable instrument for communicating needs and feedback to our board. You all have served in this role amazingly well. A number of you have been serving on this committee for quite a few years and are almost experts in transportation. So we definitely appreciate you all's service. We're not proposing any changes as a result of anything bad that you all have done. Again, like, I think you all are performing the role amazingly well, but we still feel that there may be some opportunities to make small tweaks and adjustments to help it function just a little bit better. So I'll touch on the context for some ideas for changing the structure, kind of touch on the history and what we presented on earlier in the year. The reason why we're presenting some changes is because there are some challenges that we feel need to be addressed. In 2021, when we presented this committee with the non-discrimination and equity plan, that plan received a ton of praise. It was very well received, and in it, there were some recommendations for tweaks that could be made to not just the CAC, but all committees to help ensure adequate representation, make sure various perspectives were being solicited, and that like different viewpoints could be expressed to the board to help inform their decision-making process. So specifically, some recommendations that came out of that plan were for us to increase accessibility to meetings. Now, back at that time, the non-discrimination plan was produced in the early stages of COVID, but we knew that accessibility to meetings was a problem before then, because prior to 2020, we didn't have virtual meetings, we didn't have hybrid meetings, and it was really difficult for people, especially those who live on the outskirts of the county, to travel to county center downtown, especially if they don't own a car, to participate in these meetings. We have made some adjustments to help facilitate better participation, like GoToWebinar, call-ins. We solicit a lot of feedback through email and other means, but there are still some potential opportunities that we can take advantage of to increase accessibility for folks who may not own a car, live far away, or have time conflicts in the mornings on the Wednesday where we have these meetings. Second recommendation was for us to engage people where they're at. So again, this kind of touches on the need for folks to travel to county center if they want to participate in person. And again, we have addressed that to an extent, but we think we can do better. And then lastly, the recommendation was to evaluate ways to improve representation, and some specific recommendations that we received from the consultant team were to consider adding new seats, consider removing some seats if there's overlap or duplication, and removing barriers to membership. Speaking specifically about the issue of representation, I'm including this slide that has a pie chart to the left showing the racial breakdown across Hillsborough County. Again, that's broken down by race. So as you can see, 45% of our county is white only, 18% African American, almost 30% Hispanic, Asian 4%, and then all others combined, including biracial, is about 4%. And I don't think that there has ever been a point in the CAC's history where we've even come close to approximating that kind of representation. So we know that we can do a little bit better in terms of the composition, the demographic composition of the committee. Hillsborough County is also 51% female. 15% of the residents of the county are 65 or older. The average household income is $61,000. And I don't have data to support this, but I venture a guess to say that the representation on the CAC committee doesn't approximate that or any of those statistics for the county. Does the CAC match it? No, not even close. We are making efforts to do a little bit better, but we're still far away from achieving true representation. We have taken some steps, again, to address this issue. The CAC has evolved quite considerably. One of the tools in our toolbox for ensuring adequate representation that we've taken advantage of is adding seats to try to balance or to try to represent the demographic groups that are underrepresented. State law allows this. According to the state law, we are required to have a CAC, and the membership is supposed to reflect a broad cross-section of local residents. Specifically, the state law calls attention to minority representation, the representation of the elderly and handicapped. Those are supposed to be adequately represented. Our CAC has grown over time to try to meet that need. In 1998, we added a seat for transportation disadvantage. That is an attempt to help represent the interests of handicapped folks. In 2013, we added several seats, one specifically reserved for an African American representative, one for a Hispanic representative, one for women, one for younger folks under the age of 30, one for neighborhoods, and one for the business community. And then as recently as 2015, we added a couple seats for agencies, one being the school board and the other being the planning commission. The current breakdown of the CAC is as follows. There are 23 seats that are open. 23 seats exist is a better way to say it. 3 of them are currently vacant because we had some folks resign due to scheduling conflicts or other issues, and we have chosen not to fill those vacancies until we can bring this to a resolution. Currently, 7 in-person members constitute a quorum and allow the committee to take action. When we presented this info and the need to you back in February or March, we informed you that we were going to circulate a survey to the CAC members. We have done that, and we reported on the results of the survey in a previous month. Over the past 2 months, we circulated a survey to a wider audience. We attempted to circulate it across all of Hillsborough County and get in touch with folks who may not be aware that the TPO exists or the CAC exists. So a lot of the questions were very broad and philosophical in a sense, asking them how they feel about issues of representation and what kind of committee they would like to assemble to represent the interests of the county overall. So I'm going to quickly go through some of these and summarize what it is that we received. This is a little small, so forgive me, I'll interpret for you if I need to. The first question was whether or not it's important for CAC members to come from different geographic areas around the county, and an overwhelming majority strongly agreed with that sentiment. The second question was whether or not it's important for CAC members to come from a variety of demographic backgrounds. Some examples were race, ethnicity, income, disability status, and as you can see with the large orange bar, an overwhelming majority agreed with that sentiment as well. The third question was whether or not it's important for CAC members to use the transportation system in a variety of ways. So rather than CAC members whose primary experience within the transportation system is single occupancy vehicle, whether or not it's important for us to solicit opinions from people who bike frequently, walk frequently, commuters that take the bus, and a variety of other modes. And I wouldn't say an overwhelming majority were in support of this. About half strongly agreed, just under 20% agreed, and the rest were neutral. Only a few people disagreed with that sentiment. The fourth question was whether or not it's important for CAC members to be engaged in the community, as evident by their participation in some civic groups or civic associations, social service organizations. The results on this were kind of mixed. The largest category of respondents strongly agreed with that, but a large number were also neutral. And this question had almost an even split between those who agreed and those who disagreed. So we're kind of tabling that for right now. We feel that the results of the survey don't point us in one direction or another. The fifth question was whether or not CAC membership should be limited to 2 terms. And again, you see that the results of the survey were split. About half said that they strongly agreed with that sentiment, and a half were neutral on the topic. And of those who didn't strongly agree or who were neutral, they were split between disagree and agree. The sixth question was asking survey respondents to rank their preferable meeting format. These were all pretty evenly split, whether meetings should be held in person with the option to participate virtually, virtual only, or some hybrid scenario. And if we're going to take the lead of the other agencies on this and follow suit, a lot of the other local governments have switched to a hybrid meeting format. Based on the feedback we have been receiving on transportation plans and surveys that we've sent out, we feel at the staff level that the hybrid meeting format is giving us the results we would want when we seek public participation. The seventh question is which time would best allow for a member of the public to participate in committee meetings? And there was a significant majority of the respondents saying that they prefer to meet in the evening, sometime after 5 p.m. All right, that wraps up the questions for the survey that we circulated to the committee, or not to the committee, I apologize, to the community. Based on the survey responses, based on what we heard from you all in the comments when we circulated that survey back in February or March, some members of the staff got together and brainstormed some potential ways that we can address the issues that were illuminated from the survey responses. So I want to quickly go through some of these. Before I get into all of them, I want to say that these are just brainstorm proposals at this moment. We are not recommending that the committee take any action. Again, the reason why we're seeking the tweak is just to improve the CAC's functioning and efficiency if possible. We're not hoping for any sort of directive that comes from this. If you all hate all of these ideas, feel free to tell us. If you love any of them, feel free to tell us. I'll get to what the next steps are after I go over some of our ideas, and hopefully you all can submit some ideas as well. So by now we understand what the challenges are: accessibility, time of day, meeting format, and issues of representation, kind of funneled up to the top of issues that may need to be addressed. Some of our proposals are to tweak the size of the CAC to allow for better representation from some of those demographic groups that have not been represented well in the past. So our idea is to increase the size of the CAC maybe up to 2 to 3 times what it currently is. And again, there are 23 seats, so that could potentially mean a committee of 50 to 70. And you might seem shocked at that because that is a really huge number, and it would certainly be a logistical challenge for us to seat 70 members if they all showed up in person at the same time. But it's an issue that we know we can address. We know that we can overcome that challenge, and it's not without precedent. The Broward MPO has a CAC of 45 members, and the Polk TPO has a smaller staff than we do, so I'll get that out there. And they're able to host an advisor network that has 380 members currently. It invites members based on demographic interests, so they have done a really good job of soliciting participation from minority groups, those of low income, bus riders, commuters that rely on a bicycle or walking. They've really hit the pavement and tried to recruit folks to make their advisor network more representative of the demographics of the county. Another proposal that we have is to, whether or not we increase the size of the CAC, but to maybe designate some additional seats to ensure that we have perspectives that represent those from different geographic areas around the county, different demographic groups around the county, even some who may not have any representation right now. We don't currently have a seat for Asian Americans. We're, of course, like we don't have seats for different transportation users like bus riders, walkers, bikers. So those are some ways that we could address that limitation. Some other ideas we came up with to help remove the burden of membership are to allow any member of the public to nominate themselves to participate in the CAC. Rather than putting limitations based on agency appointment or political appointment, we think that we should open this up to just allow anyone who resides within Hillsborough County to seek membership for the CAC. One part of that would be to amend the application form that you all had to fill out and asking them what their interest is in transportation, but also asking if they can provide a letter of recommendation from a local civic group, something like the NAACP or any of those civic groups that represent a specific demographic group might be able to help guide our choice for who serves as a CAC member. And then lastly, to establish 2 term limits for all members. Currently, those who are appointed by an elected official are termed out when the elected official either resigns or moves on. The at-large seats on the committee do not have term limits, so the folks who are serving in those roles now basically cannot be removed. The next proposals for improving accessibility are to hold meetings in the evening, and we're open to what time works best for you all and the other folks who are interested in participating in the CAC in the future, but we think 5 p.m. might be a good start time, so we can chew on that. And then lastly, continue hybrid format. Again, at the staff level, we feel that we've been very successful in encouraging participation by opening it up to virtual and receiving comments over the phone and by email. And of course, like if we're following the lead of our partner agencies, hybrid format makes a lot of sense. So the next steps, I've just presented you with about a dozen proposals that staff came up with. I would like for this committee to kind of have a preliminary discussion, sort of like a reaction to the proposals that I just presented to you all. Over the next month, we would like for you to digest those a little bit, think on them, not just consider the proposals that we've come up with, but also brainstorm your own proposals. There's no timeline or deadline in which we're seeking to implement any of these changes. So we would like to have an opportunity for a good, robust conversation about the CAC that you envision. Now we have some time to talk about it today, but we can also bring it back in August, September, October, however long it takes for us to achieve near consensus on these issues. So again, we'd like for you to consider staff proposals, brainstorm your own, bring them to the table, and when we open this up at a future meeting, maybe we can work through the process and actually resolve some of these issues. So now I've spoken a lot. I'm going to turn it over to you all for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Johnny. Questions or observations from the committee members? Christine.
Yes, Christina Bosworth. Johnny, can you make this presentation available to us so we can review those and look at them? I know when I pulled up the agenda, there was no presentation attached to this agenda item. So I would like to take some time to think about these. If you can make that available, that'd be great.
Yeah, Christine, I certainly will. I apologize for that. I didn't have the PowerPoint ready when I had to mail out the agenda, but I'll be sure to send this out to everyone as soon as this meeting is over.
Anything else, Christina? Anyone?
I think they have a lot of great ideas. Having the meeting at night is great, and having doing the hybrid meeting be great as well. But definitely, I like the idea of having it in the evenings because that will bring more attendees in person and also for the public.
How did you feel about the suggested 5 o'clock starting time? Is that?
That's too soon. I think that's too early. Maybe 6 o'clock would be a good time.
I tend to agree. Comments from committee members online?
Yes, Chair. The first comment I see is from Ed. He says, I suggest we allow CAC members to respond to these proposals by email because if we start the discussion, it'll be endless. Ed, once we wrap up this meeting, if you send me any comments on any of the proposals, I'll be happy to either circulate them to the committee in the next agenda, or you can just send them and I'll compile a list. We can discuss it during the next presentation on the topic.
Okay, I will say one comment is, it seems like right now, I don't know if it's a majority or just a large percentage of the membership are people who are appointed either by an agency like I am, or they're appointed by the MPO members. And I guess I'm just curious, are the MPO members going to be comfortable not having an appointee? And to some extent, the result of the demographics and all the things you've laid out are really impacted by who they appoint, So anyway, those are just my comments off the cuff.
Yeah, thanks for that comment, Ed. I'll contextualize this a little bit. If the CAC does seek to make any changes to the structure of the committee, it would require you all to vote and recommend that action to the board. When we propose changes to the bylaws, it has to happen at 2 different board meetings. So if the CAC recommends an action, the board would hear it first as a status update. They'd be able to discuss it, discuss any concerns that they have with it, anything they like. and then we would have to present it again to them at the next board meeting for action. So they'll be able to review any proposals that you all send to them at least 2 times before an action is taken.
Good information, Johnny. Who else online?
I see Rick says he has questions and comments, but he typed that after Christina Costa raised her hand.
Okay,
Christina?
so I guess I'll go first. I like this information very much, and I think that it's critically important that we continue to evolve, and including some self-reflection. Johnny, I wonder on the analytics that you shared with us, how far off, you had a nice pie graph that reflected that what our community is actually made up of in terms of demographics and constituents. And I wondered if you have the opportunity to do a pie graph that would be a compare and contrast, because it's the only, to say we're not even close, I don't understand that from a measurement perspective. So I guess I would like to see that in a compare and contrast pie graph. And I also wonder from the other communities that you used as comparisons, if you have additional data on, to Ed's point from a minute ago, how many of those seats are by appointment? I'm just curious on, if we're going to compare ourselves with the notion of expanding the number of seats for the CAC, how exactly is that managed by others? So that would be helpful information to add before you send it out, like what Christine Bosworth asked for, like when we get it by email, if we could have that additional information.
Okay, yeah, thanks for
possible?
that. Thanks for that suggestion, Christine. I'll see what I can come up with in the way of demographic comparison. The reason why I say I don't think that the CAC has ever come close to approximating the countywide representation is really based on institutional memory. I had to consult with Beth and Rich in the past, and they said that they don't believe we've really ever come close to mimicking the demographic breakdown of the county. There was one point several years ago where FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, asked us to keep record of race, income, ethnicity of the members in an attempt to ensure representation, but we didn't really get good responses to those surveys. A lot of people felt that the questions were a little bit intrusive, and many were happy to offer their race and ethnicity, but we got very few responses about income. And at the time, based on the data we received, it was not even close to approximating the demographic breakdown. So when I speak, I'm talking about that survey mostly, but also consulting with Beth and Rich, who've been working with the CAC for a while. But to your other question, yes, I'll see what I can put together and include that in the mail out after this meeting is over.
I just add that I appreciate the need to understand the economic strata that we have representation here on the CAC, but I also would say that I've observed that it is a privilege to be able to serve on the CAC, and that members of the community who are living in a more paycheck to paycheck environment may not have the opportunity, although they would have the desire. It's harder to spend hours in a month on pure volunteerism if you are not, if you don't have the financial wherewithal, and that maybe a stipend is something that the CAC should consider for individuals who qualify. That would be something I would be amenable to considering.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay. Rick Fernandez typed that he has questions and comments. And then Terrence Trott also has a comment after that.
Right.
Okay, Johnny, this is Rick. Chair, may I be recognized?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay, first of all, on the fairly sizable number of scheduling and logistical type of recommendations, I certainly think there are things there that are worthy of consideration. I mean, the things that come most immediately to mind, as I'm just being extemporaneous here, are the changing of the time for the meetings, those sorts of things. Keeping it hybrid, I think there is some benefit to the hybrid access, although there is a problem with the voting issue that I think is going to continue to haunt us. But anyway, there are some good suggestions there, and I would be more than happy to work with you guys on coming up with some reasonable solutions. After we get beyond scheduling or logistics, however, I'm having a hard time finding much in these recommendations that I really embrace, to be honest. First of all, the projected size of this committee. You're really not talking about a committee. You're talking about a town hall meeting that you want to schedule once a month with 70 people in it. For the love of God, we can't manage to get all of our 20 people to show up as it is now. So I'm not really sure how that would work. Frankly, I've never been on a board or a committee that seemed to benefit in terms of efficiency and functioning by getting bigger. That's never been my experience. There are ways to get people's input without necessarily putting them around the table and imposing Robert's rules upon them. So that is a concern. Also, I can't help but notice that if all of these substantive recommendations were to be imposed, I don't know if you've actually taken a red line to our current membership, but I suspect a large percentage of our current membership would be flushed out along with the bathwater. You'd be losing a lot of experience and a lot of commitment, both of which are very important to be effective members of this committee. Those of you who, have fairly, well, even those of you that have been around for a long time, you'll remember back to the days when you first came on board and how lost you were for the first few meetings, if not for the first year or so. It takes a long time to get caught up and be actually effective in this role. And while I think term limits are not necessarily a bad thing to consider, a helter-skelter removal of people because of some bylaw amendment that might be ushered in over the course of the next few months, given the amount of investment and time that people have put into getting up to speed and somewhat expert in this area, I think would be unfair and frankly is a disservice to the community. I do have a couple of just specific questions on the survey. And before that, you mentioned that you worked with a consultant. What consultant?
Beth, someone who was involved in the non-discrimination plan production. Can you remind me of their names? I actually can't remember who the team was.
Sorry, I'm just getting my webcam on and so forth. Can you all hear me all right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So with the non-discrimination plan, we had two consultants who were advising us on how to develop the plan. Most of the work was done by staff, but we hired Charles Brown with Equitable Cities. He's a nationally renowned expert, particularly on equity issues in transportation. And so we called him in at the beginning, looking at what are the topics that we should address in the equity plan. He reviewed the scope that Joshua and Dana then carried out over the following year. And as they brought information back, he reviewed that. So he was very much in an advisor role while our staff carried out most of the work. And then we also had a local consultant to help us with public engagement. And I apologize, her name is slipping my mind, Danielle Jackson with Bayard Communications. And her area of expertise was specifically with engagement of women-owned and minority-owned businesses and helping them in this community.
Okay, thank you. I'll look them up. I don't know either one of them. I'm just curious as to their backgrounds. The survey, who managed the survey process? I guess starting with the questions that were actually sent out in the survey.
So that was a internal team effort. I believe Josh Barber, Davita Franklin, our public engagement specialist. I was involved in those meetings, and Beth. So we got together and we took a look at the recommendations from the non-discrimination plan. We put together the survey first for the CAC, sent that off to you all, and then we put together a slightly more generalized version of that, seeking more information about like general representation and accessibility, and sent that out to the community. So it was all internal. We didn't rely on consultants for that.
All right. I don't believe we have, I know I haven't, I don't believe the committee was provided with a copy of a survey that was generated for the general public. I would like to see a copy of the survey that was general public focused, if you would be so kind.
Sure.
Would there be a problem with that? Okay. And I think you had these numbers on your PowerPoint, but frankly, either my eyes are bad or the print was very small. I couldn't make out the number of respondents on the surveys that you reported on.
Approximately 50 for most of the questions. Not every respondent filled out every question, submitted a response to every question, but it was about 50 for all of them.
That's to the general public. You got 50 responses?
Yeah, I mean, this is not like a large scale transportation plan, so we didn't invest a ton of resources in it. I can ask Davita to come back and share some info about how we circulated it and distributed, but I believe it was probably social media posts, but don't take my word for it. I'll get some info and come back to you.
Okay. All right. Since we're not taking any action on this, I'll shut up for now. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Other comments from committee members, Johnny?
Yes, so Terrence asks, will the CAC have a chance to review the new application form, and can I send a blank copy of the current one? Yeah, I can absolutely do that. We haven't drafted any new application. Again, we're far away from actually taking action to address any of these. We're still in the brainstorming stage. If you all think that that's a good idea, we can do that, but we're not at that phase of actually implementing any changes. Christine Acosta asks, regarding the hybrid, does the TPO intend to upgrade technology so that virtual attendees can hear and see in-person members? As an example, cameras and or microphones. Yeah, that is something that we brainstormed before as a tech solution to some of the issues. So I can't say that that is in the budget, but it's something that we've discussed. So it's not off the table. And then Christine comments, on the side note, Charles Brown has launched a podcast called Arrested Mobility for those who would like to become more familiar with his work. And then Ed types one more comment. I agree with the need for more geographic representation. No one from East Tampa, New Tampa, underrepresented, or sorry, there's no one from East Tampa. New Tampa is underrepresented, as is the Southeast and the Northwest. And I think that those are all the comments in the chat.
All right, thank you. With regard to my colleague, Mr. Fernandez's questions, we'll see a copy of the survey, of course, when you send out the PowerPoint with the results and the questions themselves. but it does seem like a relatively small sample for a county of 1 million people. So we may want to think how we could reach more individuals or more civic groups. I'd like to offer.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chair, Rick, and all other members of the committee. Yeah, it would be great if we could have received responses that represent statistical validity, but the fact of the matter is, without a huge budget, we're probably never going to approximate that. I would consider this more of a convenience sample to try to mine feedback on the issues. It's up to the CAC members whether there's statistical validity or not to agree with the responses we received. There's nothing binding any members to say, just because 54 members of the community want to meet at 5 p.m., you're not bound to that. Again, we're honestly looking to you all for a lot of feedback because the CAC has been working very well. And as I mentioned earlier, the board really treats your feedback as important, and they rely on it for many of the tough decisions that they have to make. So no, we don't have statistical validity. I think that there is some merit to the responses, but it's also not my decision to recommend action on this. We're going to be looking to the CAC for guidance on this.
Thank you, Johnny. My other comments are with regard to other factors. Clearly, most of us probably believe we need greater representation from other geographic areas of the county. And if we're going to consider having evening meetings, whether that be periodic or on a regular basis, I think the committee should also discuss whether or not these meetings could be held in other parts of the county rather than downtown. I suspect that might encourage participation from those in Lutz or Baum or Powell Beach or other locales who find it difficult to get to a 9 o'clock a.m. meeting in downtown. So let's throw that issue on the table when we discuss this further next month, okay?
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Chair.
Any other closing comments on this issue? We will bring it back on the agenda for next month's meeting. All right, Johnny, thank you for a very enlightening report and proposals to chew on. Our next meeting is in August, as you see on the agenda. We have an opportunity now to vote on or to discuss at least any agenda topics that the committee members might like to see for our August meeting. I'm not seeing any hands.
Chair, I do have a comment, if I might, in response to what you just said.
Oh, go ahead.
Unfinished business. That's Rick, if I may be recognized. I'm trying to see where this would fit in. I guess it fits in under member interest. So maybe I'm premature in my voicing my thought here. Are you done with unfinished business?
No, we need to go through the TPO apportionment plan. If we could do that first, and then I'll recognize you under member's interest.
That's fine. I'll stay put. Okay, thanks.
Johnny, do you want to take us through the TPO apportionment plan update?
I actually invited Elizabeth Watkins to give you an update.
Okay, very good. Elizabeth, are you
whomever?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to give an update unless Beth would like to. We're gonna the board. We presented the apportionment plan to the board in May. They directed staff to go back and come up with a few other options. One that mainly ensured that maintains voting representation from all of the existing members, but that also, is updated to reflect population change as well as increased elected official representation because of the issues that we've discussed before with government in the sunshine. So staff is working on some options now, and our plan is to bring something back to the TPO board for their consideration in August.
Are there other factors, Elizabeth, other than how to deal with the existing membership? Or are you looking at other factors to that apportionment?
Yeah, so really the three primary kind of evaluation criteria for these factors are one, retaining the existing voting membership, two, having it represented to population size, three, increasing elected official representation to avoid any sunshine law issues. But also kind of a secondary thing is we were also hoping to have just like an odd number of voting members just so that votes would be a little bit easier in case, it's not a 50-50 split vote. But those are the primary factors that the board has directed staff to take into consideration in proposing a new alternative for the TPO's membership apportionment.
All right, thank you. Well, I'll give you a suggestion that will come out of left field, and I will preface it by saying it is not self-serving because I do not intend to serve as chair of this committee much longer, but you might want to consider providing for advisory membership in the TPO of some of the major subcommittees so that those members can participate actively in the discussion.
Okay, so are you suggesting like additional ex officio non-voting members to have representation on the board? Am I hearing that correctly?
That's exactly my suggestion.
Okay, thank you for that.
Nobody in the room winced when I said. All right, Johnny, thank you for that update and bringing Elizabeth in. We'll now move into the members' interest portion of the agenda. Rick Fernandez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate that. I'm not sure exactly what it's called, so this may not be dead on right, but the Reconnecting Communities grant that I understand has recently come online out of DC. And I've heard on the grapevine that the TPO staff has taken that opportunity for a grant application to perhaps generate some funds that may be put toward a Boulevard Tampa feasibility study. Again, I'm hearing this on the grapevine, nothing direct from anybody. So I was hoping that Johnny, either you or perhaps Beth, somebody from staff, could update us quickly, if not today, then at the next meeting, unless there's a time critical factor, about that Reconnecting Communities grant or whatever it's actually called. That's one. I have another something else, but I'll leave that there if anybody has a comment.
Sure, I can address that very briefly.
Cool, great.
I think that we discussed this a couple of months ago when you reviewed a draft of our Unified Planning Work Program. And one of Amber's slides showed studies that we would take on contingent on different funding sources being available. And so this was identified as one of those. And the board did approve the Unified Planning Work Program as presented. And since that time, the Federal Highway Administration has issued the Notice of Funding Opportunity about this grant program. And so our next steps are to dig into that, and we are planning to prepare the grant application over the coming months.
Okay, well, that's good news. I'm assuming there's a fairly long timeline for this kind of thing. Do you have any thought of that at all, Beth, as to when an app might actually go out, and maybe more importantly, when we might actually know if funding is available?
I don't remember when the application is due. I think it's a couple of months away. This application did, I mean, the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, came out after the Safe Streets for All notice, and we're working on that application pretty intensely right now. So I would expect us to, you know, focus a little bit more on reconnecting communities after we get that one out the door. I'm imagining it's going to be spring before we hear anything. Federal Highway has a lot of these grant opportunities out on the street right now, so it's going to take them a while to process all of that.
Okay, and Chair, I have one more question on that topic, if I may be permitted.
Sure, go ahead.
As I'm sure, Beth, you know, and anyone else that's been paying attention for the last 5-6 years would know that there's a great deal of interest in certain segments of the neighborhoods about Boulevard project. And I've already begun to receive comments of interest about being involved as something other than just passive observers in this grant application process. So I was specifically asked to make the ask of you to please get some representation out of the neighborhoods involved in this process and keep us in the loop. I'm not suggesting it needs to be me, but we got plenty of folk to keep those individuals in the loop so that one, they have input, and two, we can get information out to our constituents here.
Of course, yes. And I've heard from a couple of other folks already about this, and that is part of the guidance from the feds is to involve community members. So definitely.
Okay. And then I have one other question that I guess it's member interest or just an update, and that's the dedicated lanes on Florida Avenue and Tampa Street, the mobility issues that we've been talking about and that were addressed at the June 8th TPO board meeting. I'm just curious as to whether or not there has been, you know, any update on that, any further action by HART as has been requested by DOT, et cetera, et cetera.
I can chime in on that and just give you a very brief update based on what I know. Actually, I'm going to allow Elizabeth to do that because I don't want to say anything incorrect.
No, and I was looking to see if anybody from HART was online, and I think Chris had to jump off. But my understanding is that HART was working with their consultant to complete that application. The deadline they had set for themselves was June 30th. So and last I spoke with Chris, there didn't seem to be any reason they couldn't meet that. So my understanding is they've completed it and it should be with FDOT now, but I don't know for sure if it has been submitted, but I know the application has at least been completed.
All right. Well, I would like that placed on a member interest queue, as it were. Perhaps we could get an update on it at our next regular meeting, Johnny.
Yeah, I don't think that that'll be a problem at all. Like I mentioned at the very beginning of the meeting, we hope to have Loretta Kirk, the HART CFO, come present on their operating budget, and I'll brief her before she presents that there's going to be some questions about that dedicated lane project.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the courtesy, and that ends it for me. Appreciate it.
Brent, thanks for your good comments. Anything else to come before the committee in terms of members' interests or future topic requests?
I see.
Chair, it's Christine.
Christine.
Were you just going to say that, Johnny? I just want to say that Rick Fernandez kind of stole my thunder because I also noted that I am very interested in the status of advancing that those dedicated bus lanes and the signal prioritization. I know that the county, I recently attended a web meeting that it was focused on bus prioritization corridors. that I don't know if the rest of the committee is aware that that is something the county is studying and putting forth, but it seemed only like a land use prioritization. I did not garner much transportation prioritization regarded on the corridor. So in other words, the land use putting forward density changes so that we could support future bus lines, but there wasn't a pairing or much of one that I discerned in that study of what's happening to make sure that the alternative modes, specifically buses, would also be prioritized. So we're going to add enough people living in the areas. We also need to add some high-tech and service-related improvements so that the routes become more appealing, frankly, for the user population moving in. So I just wanted to put that as a dovetail to what Rick was asking for. So the, what are we doing to make sure that the routes are going to be more appealing and that the density formulas are changing to support them? Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Anyone else? Johnny?
I see Beth hopped on. I imagine she wants to make a comment about the bus emphasis corridors. I know she's very involved in that project and probably excited to share more info.
Well, we have been working on the bus emphasis corridors concept for quite a while, and Christine's right that a lot of the discussion recently has been about density bonuses along designated bus routes. The question of what the infrastructure would be has also been a part of the discussion, and that is something that is being looked at in a different element of the county comprehensive plan. So the capital improvements element designates level of service standards. And so the proposal that is still being reviewed internally by the agency staff right now and will be circulated publicly in the future would be to have multimodal level of service standards on those designated corridors. Right now, the bus emphasis corridors comprehensive plan amendment is being delayed at HART's request, as they would like to have some additional time to look at their transit development plan and what their financial resources are.
Okay. Thank you, Beth. Any other comments from the committee?
Chair, I see a few comments in the chat box. The first was from Amber Simmons, TPO staff, who stated that the Reconnecting Communities pilot application is due October 13th. Ed stated that he has a comment related to the Boulevard study and he would like to share that now.
Yeah, I would just like to, in addition to making sure that that the area of Tampa Heights is well represented and has input into the Boulevard study, I'd like to also urge the MPO staff to find ways to incorporate input from the 180,000 people a day who use the facility.
Okay. I'm sure that's been so noted. Anyone else, Johnny?
I'm not seeing any others, Chair. I think that's it.
All right. Well, I think this has been a very interesting and productive meeting. Good chance for us to catch up on some presentations that we were not able to see during the earlier months of the year. I will reflect back on, I believe it was Cal's report, pointing out the huge discrepancy in needs for maintenance within the city of Tampa and the available funding. And I will just encourage this committee to take a leadership role in encouraging constituents, friends, and family to consider the upcoming ballot referendum to increase the sales tax. I'm not going to advocate it, although there are some on our committee, I think, who are pretty active in it. But that would certainly go a long way towards easing some of these financial strains. So let's be sure we have a good turnout for that ballot referendum. Any other new business or any other comments to come before the committee before we adjourn? Thank you for coming to the meeting. It's good seeing the 2 or 3 of you in the meeting hall. And thank you for those of you who took the time to join us virtually. We'll meet again in August. Thank you to our staff for a well-organized meeting. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all.
Did you need or get parking?
She brought them out, yeah.
That's our one perk.
Yeah.